October 13th, 2023. Friday. An abandoned house on the outskirts of Blackwood, a town lost in time. No records, no history, only whispers. For 2 centuries, it had stood in silence, watching as generations passed. No one truly knew who had built it, who had lived there, or why it had been left to decay. But the most terrifying mystery was this. Anyone who entered never returned. There were no last words, no evidence of what happened. They simply vanished. Ghost hunters, thrill seekers, historians, all drawn to its sinister presence, all consumed by it. The house did not just hold secrets. It devoured them. What was inside that no one had lived to speak about? Why had every attempt to uncover the truth led only to silence? And most terrifying of all, was the house truly abandoned, or was something waiting inside? If you want to uncover the truth with me, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications because what I am about to show you will answer everything. The gate loomed before me, rusted and heavy, its iron bars twisted like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. I hesitated before pushing it open. A shriek of metal tore through the night as it moved, leaving a red stain of rust on my palm. The air was different here, thicker, heavier, as if the house itself was breathing. I stepped onto the path, each footstep swallowed by the silence. The night was strangely still. No wind, no insects, no distant sounds of life. Just a dead, suffocating quiet. The house towered before me, taller than it had seemed from afar. Its wooden walls, blackened by time, seemed to shift under the dim moonlight, as if the structure itself was alive. The windows were shattered in places, yet no light reflected from within. It was not just darkness inside. It was emptiness, a void. As I neared the entrance, I noticed something carved into the massive wooden door. Deep gashes, like claw marks, stretched from the handle to the frame. Not just scratches, desperate, frantic marks, as if someone had tried to escape. I reached for the handle. The moment my fingers touched it, a freezing sensation shot through my arm, like I had grasped something buried in ice. A sudden gust of wind howled behind me, slamming the iron gate shut with a thunderous bang. My breath hitched. The air grew even colder. Everything in me screamed to turn back, but I was already here. I turned the handle and stepped inside. The door shut behind me. The darkness swallowed me whole. The door groaned as it shut behind me, the sound dragging through the silence like nails against stone. The air inside was thick, stale, carrying the scent of something long dead. My flashlight flickered as if struggling against the suffocating darkness, casting weak beams onto the dust-covered floor. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. The entrance hall stretched before me, its vastness far greater than I had expected. The ceiling loomed high, disappearing into the shadows, while thick wooden beams ran across it like skeletal ribs. The wallpaper, once elegant, had rotted away in long, curling strips, exposing the damp, cracked wood beneath. Then I saw it, a massive wall directly across from the entrance, towering over the hall. My flashlight barely reached its edges, and at first, I thought it was just another ruined section of the house. But as I stepped closer, the truth clawed its way into my mind. Names, hundreds of names, faintly etched into the surface, as if they had been scratched in with trembling hands. Some had deep, violent gashes through them, while others had faded with time, barely legible beneath the layers of dust. I raised my light higher. Each name had 2 dates beside it. One was always the same, the date they had entered this house. The second was their death date. My breath caught in my throat. Some of the dates were centuries old. Others were recent, too recent. I ran my fingers over the carvings, feeling the rough indentations. My eyes scanned the wall, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. Then my blood ran cold. The last name on the list. It was mine, and next to it, only the first date was carved. The date I had entered. The death date had not been filled in. Yet, I stumbled back, my pulse pounding as the realization sank into my bones. Who had written these names? Who had been here before me? Had they ever escaped? Or were they still here, somewhere within these walls, trapped in the endless darkness? And worst of all, was someone watching me right now, waiting to carve my death date next? The house was silent, but it was not empty. I was not alone. The door groaned as it shut behind me, the sound stretching through the empty halls like a dying breath. The air inside was thick, stale, carrying the scent of damp wood, dust, and something else. Something that clung to the walls like a presence unseen. Decay perhaps, or something worse. I raised my flashlight, its dim beam slicing through the suffocating darkness. The house stretched endlessly before me, its towering walls lined with faded wallpaper, peeling in long, jagged strips. Doorways yawned open into rooms swallowed in shadow. A grand staircase loomed ahead, its wooden steps warped with time, the railing carved with intricate patterns that had been worn smooth by centuries of touch. And then I saw the wall. It stood at the far end of the entrance hall, directly across from the door I had just stepped through. At first, it seemed unremarkable, just another surface coated in dust and neglect. But when my flashlight passed over it, the light caught something beneath the grime. Names, dozens of them. No, hundreds. Each name was etched carefully into the wood. The letters faint but unmistakable. Some carvings were shallow, as if done in haste. Others were deep, almost gouged into the surface, as though the person who wrote them had wanted to make sure they were never forgotten. James Calloway, Eleanor Fitch, Daniel Hawthorne, Catherine Moore, and so many more. I stepped closer, my breath shallow, my fingers trembling as I reached out. The wood was rough beneath my touch, the carvings uneven. But it was not just the names that sent ice through my veins. It was the dates beside them, a date of entry and a date of death. Every single person on this list had come into the house. Not one had left. I swallowed hard, my flashlight shaking as I scanned the list. My eyes moved downward, searching for something, anything that might explain why this was here, who had written it, or how long it had been growing. And then I saw my own name, etched deep into the wood. The date beside it, today's date. A sharp chill crept up my spine, spreading through my limbs like ice. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, each pulse a drumbeat of dread. My throat tightened, my breath catching as I took a stumbling step back. This was not possible. This had to be some kind of sick joke. But the dust was undisturbed. The carvings aged into the wood itself. No one had touched this wall in years, decades even. Yet, somehow my name was there. The silence in the house was unbearable, pressing in from all sides. It was too quiet. No house this old should be this silent. The air itself felt heavy, as though the walls were holding their breath, waiting. I turned, my flashlight flickering as I moved toward a massive, dust-covered mirror hanging nearby. The glass was cracked, warped with age, but it still reflected the room behind me. And then I saw it, a shadow in the mirror. Not mine, something else, something standing behind me. I spun around, my breath hitching, but the hallway was empty. My flashlight swept across the space, searching, but there was nothing. Just the silent, suffocating dark. And then, from the mirror, a whisper. "You should not be here." The voice was neither male nor female, old nor young. It was something else entirely. Something wrong. A cold dread settled in my chest. I took another step back, my pulse thundering. The whisper came again, closer this time, a breath against my ear. "Leave before it sees you." A crack split through the mirror. A jagged fracture ran from top to bottom, distorting my reflection. My own face stared back at me, twisted and broken through the shattered glass. And behind me, in the reflection, the shadow had moved. I turned to run, but something felt different now. The house was not just empty. It was watching me. And somewhere in this endless, decaying place, something had carved those names into the wall. But who? And why? And how did my name appear before I even set foot inside? The air inside the house grew colder, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. My flashlight flickered again, the beam weak against the vast darkness stretching beyond the grand hall. My mind raced, trying to process what I had just seen. How was my name carved into that wall before I even arrived? Who had written it? And if every person on that list had died here, was I next? I forced myself to take a breath, steadying the shaking in my hands. The mirror's reflection still lingered in my mind. That shadow standing behind me, unmoving yet unmistakably aware of my presence. The whisper had warned me to leave, but it was too late for that now. My feet moved forward despite the warning screaming in my head. I had to know more. The hallway stretched into the house like an open mouth, the floor beneath me creaking with every hesitant step. The walls were lined with old portraits, their frames caked in dust, The faces inside faded with time. But as I passed each one, I felt the unmistakable sensation of eyes following me. The deeper I went, the more wrong everything felt. The silence was no longer just emptiness. It was anticipation. And then I saw something at the end of the hall. Another door. Unlike the others, this one was newer. The wood was dark, polished, and free of the decay that clung to the rest of the house. Something about it sent a fresh wave of unease crawling up my spine. I reached for the handle. It was ice cold. I hesitated for only a second before pushing it open. The room inside was unlike anything I'd seen in the house so far. A study. Massive wooden bookshelves lined the walls, filled with books so old their spines had begun to crumble. A heavy wooden desk sat in the center of the room, covered in scattered papers and a single unlit candle. And then I saw it, the journal. It lay open on the desk, its pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. I stepped closer, my fingers brushing against the brittle paper as I read the words written inside. October 12th, 1843. Another visitor arrived today. He was confident, as they always are. He believed he would uncover the truth. They all do, but the house does not give away its secrets. It only takes. I flipped to another page, my pulse hammering. December 3rd, 1897. The house is restless tonight. It calls for another. The last one did not last long. They never do. The names are carved as always. The list grows. Soon, it will have another. I swallowed hard, my eyes scanning further down the page. And then I saw it. My name, written in the same precise handwriting, in ink that looked fresh, as if it had been written just moments before I entered the room. My breath caught in my throat. Someone knew I was here. Someone had been expecting me. The candle on the desk flickered to life without warning, the flames springing up as if it had been waiting for me. Then a sound, not from inside the study, from the hall. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving closer. I turned off my flashlight. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. A shadow stretched across the floor, creeping in under the gap between the door and the floorboards. I could not move. I could not breathe. The shadow shifted. The handle of the door turned slowly. I braced myself as the door creaked open. And standing there, in the doorway, a figure. Their face was obscured by darkness, but their presence filled the room, pressing against me like an invisible force. My pulse pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. Then the figure spoke. "You should not have come here." Their voice was low, hollow, filled with something I could not name. My body screamed for me to run, but my feet refused to move. And then I saw what was in their hand. A knife, old, rusted, but still sharp enough to do what it was meant to do. I had seconds to react, but before I could move, the candle went out. Darkness swallowed everything. And the last thing I heard was my own name whispered in the black. The darkness felt alive. It wrapped around me like something sentient, pressing against my skin, filling my ears with a suffocating silence. My pulse pounded in my skull as I strained to listen. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. I tried to move, but my body felt frozen, locked in place by the overwhelming weight of something unseen. The figure had been right there. The knife had been inches from me, and now there was nothing. I fumbled for my flashlight, my fingers slick with sweat as I clicked it back on. The beam flickered weakly, barely cutting through the blackness. The room was empty. The doorway was open. The figure was gone, but I was not alone. The air had changed. The study, once still and silent, now carried a presence that made my skin crawl. I could feel it, watching, waiting. Then something moved behind me. I spun around, heart slamming into my ribs. The journal. The pages flipped on their own, as if an unseen hand was searching for something. The candle had gone out, yet the edges of the pages curled and blackened, as though touched by fire. And then the flipping stopped. A single entry stood out among the rest, fresh ink glistening under my flashlight's beam. February 26th, 2023. My stomach dropped. Today's date. I forced myself to read the words beneath it, even as every instinct screamed for me to stop. The visitor has arrived. He has seen the names. He has found the study. The house is awake. My breath caught in my throat as the last line burned itself into my mind. He will not leave. A sharp creak from the hallway sent ice through my veins. Something was out there. Something was coming. I had to move. Now, shoving the journal shut, I turned toward the door, stepping cautiously into the hallway. The house seemed darker than before, the walls closing in, the portraits watching me with hollow, unblinking eyes. Then, I noticed something I had not seen before. At the very end of the hall, where the shadows were thickest, stood another door. A door that had not been there before. I did not want to go near it, but I had no choice. The hallway behind me was no longer empty. The air shifted, a presence loomed, and then a whisper right behind me. Run. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. A heavy silence hung in the corners, pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe. I could still feel that whisper against my ear, echoing in my mind as I reluctantly stepped deeper into the room. I tried to focus on the present, on what lay in front of me. The bodies. They were not just mannequins. I knew that now. They were real. Too real. Their faces, frozen in expressions of terror, told me everything I needed to know. Each one of them had met their end here. But where were their bodies? Where were the remains of those who had entered this house and never returned? The walls seemed to close in around me as I moved further into the room. My flashlight flickered again, casting long, unnerving shadows across the floor. My pulse quickened. I needed to know. I had to know. What happened to them? Where were their bodies? I glanced around, my eyes darting to each corner, each crevice in the room. The bodies were scattered, but not a single one appeared to be dead on the floor. They were standing stiff and unmoving, pressed against the walls as though something had once bound them there. But what about the rest? The rest of them, the ones that had truly disappeared. A chill crept up my spine as I realized what was wrong with the room. It wasn't just the bodies that had been left behind. It was what wasn't there. No blood, no decay, no signs of struggle. Just these lifeless forms that had been frozen in place, as if some force had taken control of them, trapping them for eternity. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. But then something caught my eye. A small, narrow door hidden behind one of the bodies. It was barely visible at first, blending into the shadows, but now it stood out like a dark omen. The door was old, its frame cracked and weathered, like it had been forgotten for years. What was behind it? I had to find out. I pushed aside the body that had been leaning against the wall, revealing the hidden door. My hands shook as I reached for the handle, turning it slowly. The door creaked open with an unsettling groan, as though it had not been disturbed in centuries. I stepped into the dark hallway that lay beyond. It was narrow, winding, and suffocating. The air smelled musty, stale, as if no one had been here for far too long. The floor creaked beneath my weight as I moved forward, and the walls seemed to press in, narrowing with every step. The darkness felt alive, crawling toward me, enveloping me in its grip. There was something down here. I could feel it. Something old. Something waiting. I came to another door. This one was heavier, darker than the last. Its edges were covered in dark, streaking stains. As I reached out to open it, I felt the coldness of the doorknob, a chill that seemed to seep into my very bones. With a deep breath, I twisted the knob. The door opened to reveal a room filled with rows of shelves, each one filled with what appeared to be old, brittle books. The dim light of my flashlight swept across the room, casting eerie shadows against the walls. But it wasn't the books that caught my attention. It was the bones. Lining the shelves, neatly stacked, were skeletal remains, victims from the past, it seemed. Each shelf held the bones of someone who had once been alive, someone who had walked these very halls. Their names were not etched in stone this time. Instead, they were written in dust, as if someone had painstakingly placed them there, only to leave them to be forgotten. I stepped forward, running my hand along the edge of the shelf. The bones felt cold, ancient. But then something caught my eye. In the corner of the room, hidden behind a stack of old books, was a large, thick book with a cover made of worn leather. It was almost as if it had been placed there deliberately, waiting for me to find it. I picked it up with trembling hands, flipping through its pages. Names. Each page was filled with names. Names of people who had come to this house, just like me. But what was more unsettling was the fact that beside each name was a date. A date that was a death date. I stopped at one page, feeling my heart skip a beat. The name on the page was familiar. Too familiar. My own name. But what did it mean? Why was my name in this book? Had I already met my fate? Or was this some kind of twisted warning? I had to know. I couldn't leave until I understood what was happening here. And yet, what if I was already too late? Where were the bodies of the others? Where had they gone? I had to search the rest of the house. There was more to this place, more to its story. I had only uncovered a fraction of it, and I knew, deep down, that the answers lay in the remaining rooms. But the real question was I prepared for what I was about to discover? The night seemed to stretch on forever as I stood frozen, staring at the wall of names, each one etched into the wood, their death dates chillingly precise. The air had grown thick, oppressive, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make my next move. I could feel something, someone watching me, the weight of invisible eyes pressing into my back. The house was alive with a dark energy, and I was now a part of it. But I could not turn back. The urge to know more, to understand what had happened here, was overpowering. I stepped away from the wall, my heart racing. I had to keep going. I had to see where those bodies were, where the missing visitors had disappeared. I glanced back at the names, wondering if anyone else had ever gotten this far. Had they too felt that suffocating pull? Or had they simply vanished without a trace, never to be heard from again? The hallway ahead was long and narrow, lined with dusty portraits that seemed to shift in the dim light. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the old floorboards beneath my feet. I followed the hallway, my eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The house was vast, with a maze of rooms that I could barely keep track of. I needed to find something, anything that would explain the horrors I had already seen. The further I ventured, the more I felt like I was stepping into something I was never meant to uncover. As I moved deeper into the house, I felt a pull toward a door at the far end of the hall. It was smaller than the others, almost hidden in the shadows, as though it was trying to conceal itself from view. But something about it drew me in, an irresistible force that I could not ignore. There was more to this place, more to its story. I had only uncovered a fraction of it, and I knew, deep down, that the answers lay in the remaining rooms. But the real question was I prepared for what I was about to discover? The night seemed to stretch on forever as I stood frozen, staring at the wall of names, each one etched into the wood, their death dates chillingly precise. The air had grown thick, oppressive, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make my next move. I could feel something, someone watching me, the weight of invisible eyes pressing into my back. The house was alive with a dark energy, and I was now a part of it. But I could not turn back. The urge to know more, to understand what had happened here, was overpowering. I stepped away from the wall, my heart racing. I had to keep going. I had to see where those bodies were, where the missing visitors had disappeared. I glanced back at the names, wondering if anyone else had ever gotten this far. Had they too felt that suffocating pull? Or had they simply vanished without a trace, never to be heard from again? The hallway ahead was long and narrow, lined with dusty portraits that seemed to shift in the dim light. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the old floorboards beneath my feet. I followed the hallway, my eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The house was vast, with a maze of rooms that I could barely keep track of. I needed to find something, anything that would explain the horrors I had already seen. The further I ventured, the more I felt like I was stepping into something I was never meant to uncover. As I moved deeper into the house, I felt a pull toward a door at the far end of the hall. It was smaller than the others, almost hidden in the shadows, as though it was trying to conceal itself from view. But something about it drew me in, an irresistible force that I could not ignore. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, but the moment I touched it, I felt a sharp sting, like an electric shock, that made my entire body freeze. It was as if the house had reacted to my presence. I hesitated for a moment, my breath shallow, before I pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, sending a jolt of panic through me. The room beyond was suffocatingly dark, the air thick with dust and the faint smell of decay. I stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing a room that looked untouched by time. The walls were covered in strange symbols, some of them barely visible beneath layers of grime. Others scrawled in what I could only hope was paint. But something about the markings felt wrong, alive, even. They pulsed with a strange energy, as though they were waiting for something or someone to return. In the center of the room stood a large wooden table, its surface carved with more of the same symbols. And there, sitting atop the table, was an old leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up, feeling a cold shiver run down my spine as I opened it. The writing inside was faint, the ink nearly faded, but the words were unmistakable. The entries were from the house's previous owner, someone who had been obsessed with immortality, someone who had made a deal with something far darker than they could comprehend. The journal spoke of rituals, sacrifices, and promises made to entities that lived between life and death. The names on the wall, I realized, were not just victims. They were part of the ritual, part of a twisted game played by something that had no place in the world of the living. The journal mentioned a last step to complete the cycle, and as I read those words, the temperature in the room dropped. I could feel the house stirring, the walls shifting, as if something ancient and malevolent was waking up. My heart raced as I looked around the room, suddenly feeling very much alone, but not in the way I had before. Something was in here with me. I heard it, a soft scraping sound, like something dragging across the floor. Slowly, I turned, my flashlight trembling in my hand as the beam swept across the room. The scraping grew louder, more frantic. Then, from the corner of the room, I saw something move. At first, it was just a shadow, a fleeting glimpse. But then it became clear, a figure, hunched and twisted, crawling toward me, its body contorted in unnatural angles. I froze, unable to move, as the figure slowly emerged from the shadows. It was one of the missing visitors, their face pale and gaunt, eyes wide with terror, mouth open in a silent scream. But it was not alive. The figure's movements were jerky, like a puppet controlled by invisible strings, and it was coming for me. I backed away slowly, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body refused to obey. The figure's hand reached out, fingers curling like claws, and I could feel the coldness of its touch even from a distance. It whispered something I could not understand, but it felt like a warning. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure stopped. It stood motionless in front of me, its empty eyes staring into mine, and the air grew thick with a sense of dread. The room seemed to pulse, the walls closing in around me. And in that moment, I realized that I was no longer alone in this house. The spirits of the lost visitors, the ones whose names were etched into the wall, were still here, trapped, waiting for someone to finish what had been started. The question was, would I be the one to complete it? What had happened to those who came before me? Why were their bodies missing? And where are they now? And who, or what, was watching me from the shadows, waiting for me to make my next move? I needed answers. I had to know what had happened to them, and why the house was still so hungry. But would I survive long enough to uncover the truth? Would I, too, become one of the forgotten names on that wall? The house seemed to grow darker, the shadows pressing closer. The answers I sought were just beyond my reach, and I could feel the pull of the house growing stronger. But was I ready to face what lay hidden in the darkness? The next step awaited, but I knew it would not be an easy one. The house had already taken so much from those who entered before me, and now it wanted me too. The only question was, would I make it out alive, or would I become part of its cursed history? Was I ready to uncover the truth about the missing bodies, the rituals, and the house's sinister past? And if I did find the answers, would I be able to escape with my life? These were the questions that plagued my mind as I stepped forward into the unknown. The house felt heavier now, as though it was tightening its grip on me with every breath I took. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should have, curling around every corner, clinging to the walls like they had a life of their own. The figure, one of the lost souls, maybe, or something else entirely, remained motionless in front of me. Its hollow eyes did not blink, did not move, just stared cold and unfeeling into my very soul. I wanted to run. I wanted to escape, but my legs were frozen, my body unwilling to obey my desperate need to flee. The journal, heavy and strange in my hand, pulled my attention back to the task at hand. I could hear the soft rustling of pages, though I did not turn it. I just knew that what was written inside held the key to understanding everything. I had to finish what had been started, and despite the terror gnawing at my insides, I had no choice but to follow through. The figure's arm twitched. Its fingers, unnaturally long and contorted, scraped against the floorboards. It crawled forward with an eerie stillness, dragging its body in a jerky motion that made my skin prickle with unease. It reached towards me, slow at first, but then faster, more erratically. I could hear the creak of the floor beneath it, the scraping of bone against the wood. A low hiss escaped its mouth, soft, guttural, like something old and animalistic, not human at all. But it stopped before it touched me. Its eyes locked with mine, its head tilting as though studying me. And for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw something there, something not entirely sinister. It was like a whisper of humanity, a reminder that it was not always this way. This creature, this thing. It was someone once, someone who had walked through these halls, someone who had been like me. It pointed to the journal in my hand, its bony finger trembling with an almost frantic energy, urging me to open it again. The feeling was so strong, so compelling, that I could not resist. I turned the pages, my fingers trembling as I scanned the text. And there it was, the answer I had been searching for, though it made the blood in my veins run cold. The pact, the ritual, it was all written out, clearer now than it had been before. It spoke of sacrifices, of lives given to break the chains that held the house together. A life, one life, to release them all. The souls trapped inside, bound by the house's hunger, could only be freed if another took their place. The last step, the final act, was clear. The living must step into the role of the dead. The figure let out a low, almost satisfied sound. It seemed to understand the weight of the words I had just read. It stepped back, its body dissolving into the shadows as it vanished completely, leaving behind only the eerie stillness. The house seemed to sigh, as if it had been waiting for me to reach this point. The floorboards creaked under my feet, and I felt a shift in the air around me, a change that seemed to resonate from the very walls. The house was alive in ways I could not begin to comprehend. I could feel its pulse, its hunger, and it was drawing me deeper into its grasp. I knew I had to continue. The house was waiting, and the final step, whatever it was somewhere further inside. But then a single thought pierced through my growing panic. What about the bodies? Where were they? The bodies of the victims before me, the names on the wall. Where had they gone? Had they truly died, or had they become something else entirely? Had they been consumed by the house, or had they been part of something much worse? The walls felt closer now, the air thicker. I had to find the final room, the place where the last part of the ritual would unfold. I had to face whatever waited there. But something was off. The house seemed to be shifting as though it was alive, reacting to my thoughts, my fear. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to turn around and leave. But I could not. Not when I had come this far. Not when the answers were so close. And then I saw it. A door, just barely visible in the distance. It was different from the others. Older, weathered. And as I stepped closer, I noticed a strange, cold draft seeping from beneath it, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was not like the other doors I had seen in this house. This one had a feeling to it. Something unsettling, as though it held all the secrets I had been trying to uncover. I reached for the door handle, my hand shaking. The shadows around it seemed to shift, twisting unnaturally as I stepped closer. The house was breathing with me now, as if it was waiting for me to take that final step to open the door. There was no going back now. I turned the handle. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. The cold air poured out in waves, washing over me in an icy gust that seemed to steal the breath from my lungs. It was as though the room behind the door was holding its breath, waiting for me to enter. But I hesitated. Something was wrong. This was not like the other rooms. This was not a place for discovery or answers. This was the heart of the house, the place where it all began and where it would end. With every step, the darkness seemed to grow, the shadows folding in on themselves, like the house was swallowing me whole. I took another step, and another, and then, as I crossed the threshold into the room, I realized I was not alone. I could feel it, the weight of countless eyes on me. The house was alive with more than just the whispers now. The bodies, the souls, were there too, trapped in the walls, watching, waiting for the ritual to be completed. I was standing in the center of the room now, the door behind me closed, and the silence was suffocating. I could not move. I could not breathe. There was something in that darkness, something ancient, something powerful. And then the floor beneath me groaned. I was not alone, but who was with me? Had I become part of the house, or was I finally going to uncover its deepest secret? The darkness seemed to pulse around me, and for the first time, I felt the house take control. The deeper I ventured into the house, the more the oppressive silence seemed to squeeze the life out of me. It was as though the house itself was breathing, slow and heavy, waiting for me to make the next move. The darkness was thick now, more tangible than before. The walls felt closer, pressing in as if they were aware of my every step. The creaking floorboards underfoot sounded louder, more deliberate, almost mocking. I walked past the room where the wall of names had been. The memory of those dates burned into my mind. The chilling thought that each one was another soul claimed by this place, lost forever, made my skin crawl. The air had grown colder, much colder, and with each step, I felt like I was being watched. But it was not just the eerie feeling of being alone. No, it felt like there were eyes, hundreds of eyes, staring from the shadows. I could not explain it, but something inside me told me that this house knew I was here, that it was waiting for me to unlock its deepest secrets. I reached the end of the hall, where an old wooden door stood half open. I could not help but feel a pull, a magnetic force drawing me toward it. Hesitantly, I pushed the door further open. The room was suffocating in its darkness, yet I could make out faint outlines of what appeared to be shapes. Human shapes, but not quite human. They were translucent, flickering in and out of view like faulty film projections. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But as I stepped further in, one of them, a figure of a man, seemed to solidify before my eyes. His eyes met mine, and for a split second, I saw a look of agony, a scream that never left his lips. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. The figure reached out, his hand hovering just above the floor. It was as if he were trying to warn me, to tell me something, but the moment I took a step forward, the figure evaporated into thin air. It was then that I realized this house was not just a place. It was a prison for souls, for the lost, for those who had entered seeking answers. I had heard the stories before, but standing in this room, surrounded by the remnants of those who had come before me, I understood. The names on the wall were not just names. They were warnings. I turned, my breath quickening, and made my way to the next room. The house seemed to stretch on endlessly, each room worse than the last. But I had to know. I had to see for myself the fate of the others who had dared enter. Were their bodies still here? Were they part of the house now, woven into its very fabric? I reached the basement door, the one I had been avoiding. The cold seemed to emanate from the cracks in the wood, a cold that seeped into my bones. But I had to know, what was the real story behind this place? What happened to those who entered? And what had happened to me in this cursed house? I opened the door. The basement was dark, too dark, and yet I heard the sound of something moving down there, something shifting, dragging itself along the floor. My heart stopped. Could it be? Was it the bodies? The ones that had disappeared? I could not turn back now. I had to face whatever lay down there. I had to discover the truth. Would the bodies of those lost souls still be there? Or had they become part of the darkness itself? I stepped into the basement, the door creaking closed behind me. Was I making the same mistake they had made? Was I about to lose myself in this house, just as they had? And if I found the bodies, would I be able to leave? Or would I, too, become a part of the house's history? To be continued. I made my way down the stairs, the air growing colder with each step I took. The basement felt like it had been forgotten, the smell of dampness and something else, something unsettling, thick in the air. It was quiet, almost too quiet, and the darkness pressed in on me. My flashlight flickered a few times, casting long shadows that made the walls look like they were closing in. At the far end of the room, I noticed a large, rusty door slightly ajar. It looked out of place, like it didn't belong in a basement of this age. I took a deep breath and walked toward it. My hand shook as I gripped the handle and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passage. I hesitated, but curiosity pushed me forward. As I stepped inside, I saw something that made my stomach tighten. On the walls were names. The same names I had seen upstairs on the wall. But here, there was a terrifying detail. Each name was followed by a single word. Sacrifice. I took a step back, my pulse racing. What was this place? What had happened here? The walls were covered in these names, all leading to something I couldn't quite understand. The air felt thick, like something was watching me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself, but the feeling of dread only grew. And then I heard something. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate. Not mine. I froze, turning around to find a source. But the room was empty. The footsteps stopped. Silence returned. I backed away, my mind racing. What was going on here? I needed to leave, but the weight of the questions in my mind kept me rooted to the spot. Why had the names been written? Who had done this? And more importantly, why was I here? I started to turn toward the stairs to leave when a cold sensation brushed against my leg. I jumped, spinning around, but saw nothing. My heart pounded as I ran back up the stairs, desperate to get out of that basement. But as I reached the top, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, just out of reach, waiting for me to make one wrong move. What had I uncovered? And who else was in that house with me? As I moved through the house, the unsettling feeling that had taken root deep within me grew stronger. The silence was suffocating, and it seemed as though the house itself was alive, watching my every move. I had passed the names on the wall, each one etched in a way that made it feel like the house had claimed them, marking its victims in a twisted, permanent way. The mystery of who wrote them still lingered in my mind, and the fact that every person who had entered this house had met a grim fate only fueled my sense of dread. I reached the study once more, the room that had unnerved me earlier. The bookshelves, lined with dust-covered tomes, now seemed less daunting. I wasn't sure if it was my own growing curiosity or a strange pull from the house itself, but I felt the urge to examine the room more thoroughly. My eyes landed on a small wooden chest sitting quietly on the desk, almost as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. Despite the nagging voice in my head urging me not to open it, I approached the chest. It was beautifully crafted, with intricate carvings that had faded over time. I could not resist the temptation. With one cautious motion, I lifted the lid. Inside, there was a single piece of yellowed paper, frayed at the edges. The handwriting on it was faded, but still legible. I held my breath as I read the words, a growing sense of unease filling me. The paper was a list of names that had not been on the wall in the hallway. Names I had never seen before. And next to each name was a date, dates that seemed far too recent, dates that hinted at something more sinister. I swallowed hard. The names were from the past, but the dates, they seemed to be from the future. It was impossible to comprehend. How could this be? Had new people come to the house? Were they still being drawn into the same fate as those before them? As I stood there, holding the paper, I could not help but feel as if the house was still luring people in, still marking its victims one by one. The dread in my chest grew heavier. I needed answers, but I was terrified of what I might find. I closed the chest slowly, almost as if I was afraid to disturb the contents, and set it back on the desk. I had to keep going. The house had secrets, and I was determined to uncover them. But every step I took seemed to pull me deeper into its grip. I needed to find out what happened to all the others who had stayed here. And most importantly, who was still adding to that list. I felt the weight of those unanswered questions pressing down on me. But there was no turning back now. I had to know the truth. If you're as curious as I am about what happens next, make sure to like and subscribe. And do not forget to comment below. What do you think is going on in this house? What is the connection between the names on the wall and the mysterious dates? I cannot wait to hear your thoughts, because I know I am not the only one feeling the pull of this house's dark secrets. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the shadowed figure of the woman. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Her form was faint, like a fog drifting just behind me. The more I looked, the clearer her outline became. She was dressed in an old-fashioned gown, its fabric torn and stained with what looked like dried blood. Her face was hidden behind a veil, her presence both haunting and eerily calm. I stepped back from the mirror, my heart racing, trying to calm myself. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Why would there be a woman in the mirror who wasn't physically there? Was she part of the house's past? Or was she something far worse? I turned away quickly, but the chill in the air didn't subside. The house felt alive, its walls closing in around me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, but it was useless. The longer I stayed, the more I felt the house pressing down on me, like it was watching my every move. The more I walked through the house, the more I felt the weight of its history. There were signs everywhere, faint, barely noticeable things that hinted at the lives that had once filled these rooms. A dusty photograph on the wall, a broken chair in the corner, the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. Every corner of the house whispered its secrets, but none of them made sense. As I continued through the house, I found myself in the living room. The space was large, filled with old furniture draped in white sheets. It was as though the house had been abandoned for years, untouched, frozen in time. Yet something about it fell off. The silence was suffocating, thick with the weight of years of neglect and forgotten memories. I walked toward the fireplace, where a faded portrait hung on the wall. The image was so worn that the faces were barely visible, but I could make out the shapes of people, a man and a woman, perhaps standing in front of a house that looked just like this one. I stared at the painting, trying to see if I could find some connection to the woman in the mirror. Was she one of these people? Was she part of the family that had lived here so long ago? The questions piled up in my mind, but I couldn't answer them. And as I stood there, a sense of dread began to creep over me again. I knew I needed to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to turn away from the house. Something kept pulling me deeper into its mystery, and no matter how much I wanted to escape, I couldn't. There was something about this place, something that made me feel like I was part of its story now, like I was meant to uncover its dark secrets. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Whatever I'd gotten myself into, there was no turning back. I had to find out who the woman in the mirror was and what this house was hiding. But first, I needed to know, was I truly alone in this house? And if not, who else had wandered these halls before me? Make sure to like and subscribe if you are still following my journey into this eerie house. Do you think the woman in the mirror is connected to the family in the portrait? Or is there something darker at play? As I continued through the house, there was something unsettling about how it felt. It was not the creaking of the floorboards or the faded wallpaper on the walls. It was the stillness, as though time had simply frozen here. There were no signs of life, nothing to indicate anyone had been here in years. Yet it felt as though the house was watching me, waiting for me to uncover something it had hidden for so long. I made my way down another hallway, passing rooms that were eerily untouched. The dust had settled thick on the furniture, and spider webs adorned the corners of every window. It was as though the house had been abandoned in haste, yet still held onto its secrets. But what struck me most was the silence. There were no echoes of footsteps, no sounds of wind blowing through cracks in the walls, just silence. Then I found something that made me pause. At the end of a long, narrow corridor, there was a door that looked out of place. It was not old, nor was it particularly grand, but there was something about it that caught my eye. I had walked through the house for hours, but this door was different. It was not something I'd seen before. I approached the door slowly, my hand resting on the handle. The wood felt smooth beneath my fingers, but something about it felt unnaturally new in a house like this. I opened the door, and what I found on the other side was more than I expected. It was a small room, but it had the same unsettling feeling the rest of the house carried. There was a single chair in the center, facing a small table. The table was bare except for a few items: an old candle that had long since burned down, a cracked mirror that seemed to have no reflection, and a journal. My heart began to race as I moved closer to the table. The journal looked old, its leather cover weathered with age. I hesitated for a moment, then opened it. The pages inside were filled with neat handwriting, and the first thing I read made my stomach drop. It was a list of names of people who had entered this house. There were dates written next to each one, but what made my blood run cold was what was written beneath each name: never returned. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Who were these people? Why had they never returned? I flipped through the pages quickly, each name adding to the growing unease within me. The last entry was recent, within the past few months. The name written was unfamiliar to me, but the date next to it made my skin crawl. It was the date I had entered this house. My hands trembled as I closed the journal. The room, once calm and quiet, now felt suffocating. The air seemed thicker, heavier. It was as if the house itself was closing in around me. There was no doubt in my mind now. This place was not just abandoned. It was hiding something sinister. I quickly exited the room, closing the door behind me. The rest of the house now felt different. Each step I took seemed to echo louder, and the walls seemed to close in even further. I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the house knew I had uncovered its secret. I had to leave. I turned and made my way back toward the front door, my heart racing in my chest. But as I reached the hallway, I stopped. The front door was no longer there. In its place was another door, one I had not seen before. I was trapped. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. The air inside was stale, thick with dust, and an odd metallic scent. At first glance, it looked like a simple storage space. Wooden floors, cracked walls, and a single old table pushed into the corner. But then my eyes landed on the large wooden cabinet against the far wall. The words "confidential record" were carved into the wood in rough, uneven letters. The cabinet doors were slightly open, revealing something hanging inside. I hesitated, feeling an odd unease settle in my chest. Slowly, I stepped forward and pulled the doors wider. Inside, a row of clothing hung neatly on rusted hooks. Different styles, different sizes, but all covered in a fine layer of dust. Some pieces were torn, others still looked strangely well preserved. But what caught my attention were the tags attached to each item. The yellowed paper tags were tied with frayed string, and as I wiped the dust from one, my stomach tightened. It had a name written on it, a name I'd seen on the wall outside. I checked another and another. Each piece of clothing belonged to someone from that list. I took a step back, swallowing hard. These were not just random old clothes left behind. They had been placed here intentionally, stored like a collection. But why? There were no suitcases, no personal belongings. Only these carefully hung garments. The realization made my skin crawl. The people who had entered this house and never left, these were their last known traces. But if their clothes were here, where were they? A faint sound broke the silence, a soft rustling like fabric shifting. I turned quickly, scanning the room, but nothing had moved. Maybe it was just my breathing, the sound of my own pulse in my ears. I forced myself to take a step back, my eyes lingering on the open cabinet. Someone had kept these records. Someone had made sure their names were remembered. But who? And more importantly, why only the clothes? If you're still watching, let me know in the comments. What do you think happened to them? Like the video, subscribe, and stay tuned. I turned away from the cabinet, my mind racing. The names, the clothes, the eerie preservation of it all. It was deliberate. Someone had been keeping track. But of what? Of who? I needed to know more. There was another door in the room, barely noticeable in the dim light. Unlike the others in the house, this one was plain, no ornate carvings, no signs of damage. Just a simple wooden door, slightly ajar. I hesitated before pushing it open, the hinges groaning softly as I stepped through. The room beyond was unlike any I had seen in the house so far. It was small, windowless, and lined with shelves filled with old, dust-covered files and papers. The faint scent of mildew clung to the air. At the center of the room stood a single desk, its surface cluttered with faded notebooks, stacks of brittle documents, and an old oil lamp, long extinguished. I picked up the first notebook I saw. The leather cover was cracked with age, the pages within fragile and yellowed. As I flipped through, I felt my breath catch. Each page contained a name, a date, and a single word beside it. Deceased. I checked another notebook, and another. Every single entry was the same. Names, dates, and that final word marking their fate. These were records of death. My fingers trembled as I turned the pages faster, scanning name after name. All of them matched the ones on the wall. Every visitor, every person who had walked through the doors of this house and never left. Someone had been keeping track of their deaths with precise detail. But there was something worse. Near the end of one of the notebooks, the dates became more recent. The last entry was only a few years ago. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my ears. Had someone been in this house recently? Was this still happening? And then, at the very bottom of the page, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was another name written there, a name that had not yet been marked with deceased. It was written in the same old, careful handwriting as the others, but it was fresh, as if someone had been here, waiting, knowing that soon, another record would need to be completed. I stared at the name. It was my own. Tell me, who do you think is keeping these records? And more importantly, how do they know I was coming? I stared at my name in that notebook, my breath catching in my throat. The ink was dry, but looked fresh enough that it could not have been written long ago. Someone had expected me. Someone knew I would be here. But who? And why had my name not yet been marked with deceased like the others? I could not stay in that room any longer. I turned sharply and stepped back through the door, my mind racing. The house was silent, too silent. The kind of silence that made you aware of every breath you took, every heartbeat pounding against your ribs. I needed answers. I moved through the halls with renewed urgency, retracing my steps. Every detail of the house suddenly felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were closing in, pressing the weight of its secrets against me. The portraits on the walls, the ones with those fading, lifeless eyes, seemed to be watching. The air was thick with dust and something else, something I could not quite name. And then I remembered something. The clothes. The cabinet labeled confidential record. I had left too soon. I had been so unsettled by the names and the reality of what I had found that I had not checked thoroughly. If these records were kept so meticulously, there had to be more. I forced myself back into that room, straight to the old wooden cabinet. The doors creaked as I pulled them open again, the musty scent of old fabric filling my nose. I reached out, brushing my fingers over the clothes. Each item was neatly hung, aged and faded, but still intact. And then I saw it. Tucked inside one of the coat pockets was something small, folded carefully. I pulled it out with shaking fingers and unfolded it. A note, written in the same careful handwriting as the notebook. The house chooses its own. Not all are meant to leave. I read it again, my skin crawling. The house chooses. What did that mean? I looked back at the clothes, my eyes scanning over them until they landed on one that stood out. It was newer, not fresh, but nowhere near as old as the others. A jacket that had not yet been fully claimed by time. I reached into the pocket. Another note. If you are reading this, it is too late. The house has already decided. A sharp creak sounded behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. The door to the room was slowly swinging shut. I lunged forward, grabbing the edge before it could close completely, my pulse racing. The hall beyond was empty, but I knew I was not alone. Someone or something was here, watching, waiting. The question was, had the house already made its decision about me? I gripped the edge of the door, my breath uneven, my mind racing. The house had been playing games with me since the moment I stepped inside. But this was different. The notes, the clothes, the list of names, everything pointed to one horrifying truth. This was not just an abandoned house filled with old memories. It was something far worse, something alive. I turned back to the cabinet, my eyes scanning the clothes again. If this was a record of those who had come before me, then maybe there was more hidden here. I ran my hands along the back panel of the cabinet, pressing against the wood. It felt solid at first, but then a hollow sound. My fingers found a small gap, a barely noticeable slit in the wood. A hidden compartment. I hesitated, my mind screaming at me to stop, to leave this house before it was too late. But I had come too far. I needed answers. I pried my fingers into the gap and pulled. The wood groaned, resisting at first, then gave way with a sharp crack. Behind the panel was a small, dust-covered shelf, and on it, a single yellow journal. I picked it up carefully, my fingers trembling as I brushed off the dust. The leather cover was cracked with age, the pages brittle, but the handwriting inside was still clear. The first entry stopped me cold. October 17th, 1962. I was not meant to be here. The house let me in, but I fear it will not let me leave. I swallowed hard and flipped through the pages. Each entry was more desperate than the last. I hear footsteps at night, but there is no one here. The doors lock on their own. The windows will not open. Something is watching me. The others before me. I know what happened to them now. The house does not just take them. It keeps them, buries them where no one will ever find them. I stopped reading, my hands tightening around the book. Buried. The bodies. This was what I had been searching for. But where? Where were they hidden? I turned the page, my pulse pounding. And then I saw the last entry. A single, shaking sentence. If you're reading this, you are already part of it. A loud bang echoed from somewhere deep in the house. I dropped the journal. The sound had come from below, the basement, and for the first time, I realized I had not yet found the basement door. As I stood in that cold, dust-filled room, my eyes scanned every inch, trying to make sense of what I had just found. The old cabinet labeled confidential record was still slightly swaying from when I had opened it. Inside, the hanging clothes of the victims moved eerily, as if disturbed by an unseen presence. The weight of realization sat heavy on my chest. This was not just a house. It was a graveyard disguised as a home. But something still did not add up. If these were their clothes, carefully preserved, then where were their bodies? I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the unease crawling up my spine, and turned my attention to the rest of the room. There was something off about the floor. A faint outline of square shape was visible beneath the layers of dust and grime, as if something had once been moved frequently. A trapdoor. I crouched down and ran my fingers over the edges. The wood felt rough, worn from age, but the handle was strangely smooth, as if it had been used recently. I hesitated. Every part of my mind screamed at me to leave it alone, to walk away and forget this ever existed. But I could not. Gripping the handle tightly, I gave it a pull. The door groaned, resisting at first, but then it opened. A rush of stale air hit my face, thick with a scent I could not quite place. It was not just dust and dampness. There was something else, something rotten. A staircase led downward, disappearing into total darkness. The space below felt endless, as if it stretched far beyond the house itself. I held my breath and listened. Silence. Then a faint sound. Not footsteps. Not whispers. Something dripping. I swallowed hard. The basement. It was waiting, and I had no choice but to go down. Would I finally find out what had happened to those who entered before me? Or was I about to become just another name on that cursed wall? I took one last glance at the room before stepping onto the first creaking stair. The air grew colder with each step I descended, the darkness swallowing me inch by inch. The smell intensified, a thick, putrid stench that made my stomach turn. My flashlight flickered, its weak beam barely cutting through the shadows. The staircase was longer than I expected, leading me deeper beneath the house. The walls on either side were damp, lined with what looked like old bricks, some crumbling from age. At the bottom, the space opened into a wide, underground chamber. It was not just a basement. It was something else entirely. The floor was uneven, patches of stone mixed with dirt. Wooden beams stretched across the ceiling, some barely holding up the weight of the house above. And then I saw them, rows of wooden crates lined up along the walls, covered in dust and cobwebs. Some were open, their lids leaning haphazardly against the sides. My heartbeat pounded as I moved closer. Inside those crates were bones, not just one or two, dozens. Some still had remnants of clothing clinging to them, torn and faded. The victims, every single person who had entered this house and never left. I could not breathe. My mind raced, trying to process the sheer horror of what I was looking at. Who had done this? How long had this been happening? And was it still happening? Then, from the far corner of the room, something moved. A soft, scraping sound. I turned my flashlight in that direction, my pulse hammering. There was a doorway, an opening leading further into the underground. And beyond it, the sound of something shifting in the dark. I was not alone down here, and whatever was waiting in the next room, it knew I was here. The door clicked behind me, the sound faint but unmistakable. I froze. Who had closed the door? I whipped around, scanning the dimly lit room. But there was nothing, no movement, no sign of life. The room was as silent as it had been moments before, except now it felt heavier, suffocating. I had to get out. I tried the handle again, panic rising in my chest. It was stuck, jammed. No matter how hard I pushed, it would not open. I could feel the walls closing in. A cold sweat clung to my back. My thoughts raced. I cannot stay here. But then something caught my eye, a movement, a shadow, fleeting, passing behind the curtains. My breath hitched. I took a step towards it, my legs trembling beneath me. I had come this far, but now I was not so sure. What was I looking for? What had I thought I would find in this house of forgotten souls? I walked to the desk, my hands shaking as I flipped through the papers. Names. So many names, each more chilling than the last. Each of them marked with death dates. Causes of death written in a rushed scrawl. But one name, near the end of the list, made me stop dead in my tracks. Henry Delacroix. The date was decades ago, far older than the others. But the cause of death was different. Not a simple accident. Vanished without a trace. My pulse quickened. What did that mean? I had been here for hours, and the longer I stayed, the more I began to realize the house was not empty. And I was not alone. Not anymore. I turned back to the table. A book out of place, slightly askew. I pulled it open, and beneath it, just barely visible, was a hidden drawer. With trembling hands, I opened it, revealing a journal. Leather-bound, old, but still well-kept. I flipped it open, reading the first few pages, and the room seemed to grow colder. The handwriting inside was not like the other papers. It was frantic, disjointed. Henry Delacroix's journal. As I read, I could feel my heart begin to race. This was not just a record of death. It was a confession, a story, a warning. The last entry made my blood run cold. They are still here, and so am I. The hairs on my neck stood up. Henry Delacroix had not disappeared. He had never left. The weight of everything I had uncovered pressed down on me. The names on the wall, the clothing in the cabinet, the chilling presence that never seemed to leave my side. Every step deeper into this house had led me to the same question. Why? Why had so many people entered this house, never to be seen again? The air in the corridor felt heavier now, as if the walls themselves were closing in. My flashlight flickered as I reached the final door at the end of the hall. This door was different, taller, thicker, its surface scratched and worn. The handle was rusted, and as I turned it, the sound of metal grinding against metal sent a shiver down my spine. The door creaked open. Inside, the room was almost empty except for one thing, a single wooden chair placed in the very center. The floor beneath it was covered in deep scratches, marks that looked as if someone had been dragged across the room again and again. But the worst part? There were chains hanging from the ceiling, each one rusted, but still holding small fragments of torn fabric. Pieces of clothing that matched those from a cabinet. This was where they had been taken. My stomach twisted as I backed away, my mind racing with thoughts I did not want to acknowledge. Every person who had entered this house, everyone whose name was on that wall, had been brought here. But by who? Or what? Then I heard it, a faint creaking sound behind me. I turned slowly, my breath caught in my throat. The door I had left open was closing, on its own. I rushed forward, grabbing the handle, trying to force it back open, but it did not budge. The room grew colder, the air thick with something unseen, something watching. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went still, and in the silence, a whisper, "You should not have come." The voice was right behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. I had seen enough. I needed to leave. With every bit of strength I had left, I rammed my shoulder against the door, again and again, until finally it gave way. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath. I did not stop running, not as I passed the names on the wall, not as I crossed through the main hall, not even as I burst through the front doors and into the night. Only when I reached the edge of the property did I finally turn back. The house stood there, silent, unmoving, as if nothing had happened. But I knew the truth. And now, so do you. Some stories are meant to be uncovered. Others should be left alone. If you have made it this far, I want to hear from you. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you have a story, something real, something terrifying, send it to the email in the description. Do not forget to like and subscribe, because there are more stories waiting to be told.